You think you know what precision looks like, you've seen the movies with the steely-eyed snipers, but you are not ready for the story of the man they called the mechanic, the civilian who walked onto a SEAL sniper range and did the impossible. If you love your mom and dad, if you appreciate the quiet heroes who never asked for the spotlight, hit that subscribe button and show some love, because this is a story about the kind of man they just don't make anymore. The desert air at the secret naval special warfare training compound outside of San Diego shimmers with a brutal, unforgiving heat. It is a silence that is heavy, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the occasional, almost lazy, crack of a rifle shot from a mile away. These were the best of the best, the Tier 1 operators, the men whose very existence was a national secret and whose skill with a long-range rifle was the stuff of legend. They were running a drill they called the Century Run, 100 consecutive shots on a series of increasingly difficult, moving, and reactive targets, a test of endurance, consistency, and almost supernatural focus. The scoreboard, a simple digital display, glowed with a perfect, unblemished 100/100. The team had just finished, and the quiet satisfaction among them was palpable. They had not failed. They had succeeded perfectly. And then a voice, laced with a faint, almost bored Midwestern twang, cut through the silence. "Mind if I borrow your rifle for a minute?" All eyes turned to the source of the question. He was not one of them. He was a civilian contractor named Elias Vance, a man in his late 50s with a permanent grease stain under his thumbnail and the kind of calm, patient eyes you'd expect from a watchmaker. They called him the mechanic because that was his job. He was the genius who kept their most delicate and experimental hardware running, a man who could talk to machines in a language they understood. He was respected, even liked, but he was part of the support structure, the background. He was not a shooter. The team's commanding officer, a granite-faced lieutenant commander named Shaw, almost smiled. It had been a long, grueling day, and the idea was absurd. But Shaw had seen the unflappable competence in Vance for years. He'd seen him fix a satellite comms unit with a paperclip and a prayer. There was a quiet depth to the man that commanded a strange sort of respect. "You know how to handle one of those, Elias?" Shaw asked, his tone not mocking, but genuinely curious. The rifle in question was a custom .338 Lapua Magnum, a masterpiece of engineering that cost more than a sports car, tuned to the specific hold and breath of its primary user, a senior chief with a dozen confirmed kills to his name. Vance simply nodded. "I reckon I can figure it out." There were a few exchanged glances, a few suppressed smirks. This would be a harmless bit of entertainment, a story to tell later about the day the gearhead thought he could play operator. The senior chief, a man named Miller, shrugged and handed over the weapon, a look of bemusement on his face. "Knock yourself out, Doc. Safety's on the left." Vance took the rifle as if it were a sacred object. He didn't sling it like a soldier, he cradled it like a musician holds a priceless violin. He spent a long moment just feeling the weight, the balance, his eyes closed. He then did something that made every sniper in the vicinity go still. He didn't assume a standard prone position. He walked over to a nearby steel support beam for an observation canopy, leaned against it, using it as a monopole for stability, and settled into a modified standing position that looked both awkward and utterly natural. He cycled the bolt, the sound crisp and final in the quiet. He didn't use the high-tech scope. He flipped up the iron backup sights. A murmur went through the crowd. Iron sights? At these ranges? It was tantamount to trying to perform heart surgery with a butter knife. This was no longer amusing, it was bordering on sacrilege. What none of them knew, what Elias Vance had buried so deep that the dust had settled over it for 30 years, was that he was not always a mechanic. Long before these SEALs were even born, he was a name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in the corridors of a different kind of power. He was the top graduate of the U.S. Army's sniper school at Fort Benning, a prodigy whose file was so classified it was stored in a vault that technically didn't exist. He was recruited straight into the CIA's Special Activities Division, a phantom operative for a unit so covert it was never named, only referred to by a code word, Longshot. His hunting grounds were the back alleys of Beirut, the misty mountains of Afghanistan during the Soviet War, the chaotic urban sprawl of conflicts that never made the headlines. He was a national asset, a scalpel used for the most delicate and deniable of operations. And then, on a rain-slicked rooftop in Sarajevo in 1992, everything changed. His spotter, his best friend, a man named Charlie Forsyth, was lying beside him. The target was a brutal warlord responsible for untold atrocities. The shot was a nightmare, a crosswind hell through a curtain of rain. Vance took the shot. He saw the target drop. But in the chaotic return fire, a single, stray round, a piece of blind luck, found its way through Charlie's eye. Vance carried his friend's body down 5 flights of stairs. He never fired a rifle in anger again. He resigned, disappeared, and used his genius-level understanding of physics and mechanics to reinvent himself as Elias Vance, the mechanic. He found a strange peace in the logical, solvable problems of broken machinery. The ghosts were quieter there. So, as he settled behind the SEAL's rifle, it wasn't a mechanic who looked down the iron sights. It was Longshot. The decades fell away. The feel of the stock against his cheek was a homecoming to a home he never wanted to see again. The desert wind was no longer just wind, it was a mathematical equation. He could feel the Coriolis effect, the spin drift, the minute drop in barometric pressure. It was all there, a symphony of data his mind processed without conscious thought. The first target was a standard silhouette at 800 yards. The shot was less a crack and more a single, definitive punctuation mark in the air. A perfect hit, dead center. There was a moment of surprised silence, then a few nods. A lucky shot. The next target was a smaller, swinger at 1,000 yards. Another shot, another hit. The smirks had vanished. The third target was a reactive plate that would only fall if hit in a specific 6-inch circle. Vance fired. The plate clanged and fell. He was not just hitting them, he was annihilating them. He worked the bolt with a rhythm that was hypnotic, a machine-like cadence that was both effortless and relentless. He wasn't just shooting, he was performing a masterclass. He was calling his shots before he pulled the trigger, a soft murmur describing exactly where the round would strike. High shoulder, left edge, low center. And every time, the steel target rang out in confirmation. The SEALs, these masters of the universe, were utterly mesmerized. They were witnessing something that transcended their own considerable skill. This was artistry. This was witchcraft. Lieutenant Commander Shaw watched, his mind racing, connecting dots that had been invisible just minutes before. He had access to vaults of records, and the name Elias Vance had always been a quiet, competent blank. But the legend of Longshot was a ghost story from the old days, a name spoken by retired generals over glasses of bourbon. The man, they said, who could make a bullet turn a corner. The man who once made a 3-kilometer shot that defied physics. To see that ghost story made flesh, leaning against a steel beam and casually performing miracles with iron sights, was a shock to the system. He didn't say a word. He just watched, understanding that he was in the presence of a kind of greatness that his own training could never produce. Vance continued his run. He was no longer in the California desert. He was back on that rooftop, the rain cold on his neck, Charlie's breathing steady in his ear. Every shot was an apology. Every hit was a memory. He was exorcising a demon he had carried for half a lifetime, using the tool that had created it. He finished the sequence. 100 shots. 100 targets. The digital scoreboard, which had been reset, now glowed once more, century run, 100-100. He had matched the perfect score of the world's most elite snipers, but he had done it with iron sights, from an unsupported position, and with a cold, alien calm that was more terrifying than any display of aggression. The silence that followed was profound, a vacuum of sound filled only with awe. Vance carefully, reverently, unloaded the rifle, handed it back to Senior Chief Miller, whose hand trembled slightly as he took it. "Thanks," Vance said, his voice returning to its normal, soft-spoken tone. The spell was broken. The mechanic was back. He gave a small, almost sad nod, and turned to walk back toward his workshop,